Good morning, friends.
Hello.
Welcome you from the Tagore Center. And as you know, we are starting our project on acquainting our Ukrainian friends with Indians, and also Indian friends will be getting acquainted with Ukrainian friends. So we start our program with a very interesting and a very scholarly personality. His name is Stanislav Martynyuk. So welcome, Stanislav, and I would like you to say very briefly about yourself, and then we will continue our conversation.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. It's a great honor to be accepted into this YouTube or video program. My name is Stanislav Martynyuk. My last name is really difficult to pronounce for people not outside of Ukraine, but still,
well,
I have to deal with it.
In Sanskrit, I don't think it is very difficult.
For people who speak Sanskrit, I think they have a very good foundation to speak any language after Sanskrit.
Okay, I will not interrupt you. Please continue.
So, I have a background. I have a linguistic background. I graduated from the Shevchenko University in Kiev in 2000 with a degree. 5 years. It's now equivalent to a master's in Hindi language and English language. So I'm a certified teacher, translator of Hindi and English in Ukraine. Okay. So my introduction to Oriental studies, as it was called then, was through my tutor of English. I was in 11th grade, and she suggested that I come from a very small town, some 300 kilometers from Kiev, in the Khmelnytsky region. And it was 1995, and I was going to graduate from school. And my tutor suggested that I go to Kiev to visit the university to inquire about whether they have some Oriental studies programs. And it happened that in the autumn of 1995, there was the first batch of students for 3 groups: Hindi, Farsi, and Chinese. So basically, Oriental studies in Ukraine, in independent Ukraine, which got independent in 1991 from the Soviet Union, Oriental studies in Ukraine officially began, let's say, in 1995 with the opening of the Oriental Studies Department, as it was called then, at the Shevchenko University.
Yes, but allow me to interrupt you. I will tell you, I started teaching also some course on Hindi in the journalism department.
Yes, I know.
Not an Oriental Studies department, but I had a group of students who I taught Hindi, and also courses on Indian civilization. And that was a very humble attempt, but it was for journalism. It was targeted to international journalism. So it was 94 till 96 I taught, I remember. So it's a great thing. I think, tell me about your teacher of Hindi, because let Indians know who is a great teacher who could bring, who could teach you, who could help you even develop yourself into not only Hindi, but as you should say that, by the way, you are very enthusiastic about Sanskrit, which we really don't find among modern students of Hindi, only Hindi. So that is also important. Tell me about your teacher. And I know you were taught by Stepan Ivanovich Nalivaiko, yes?
Yes, he was one of the teachers. But actually we had 3 teachers at the university who taught us Hindi. And Stepan Nalivaiko was one of them. He's the oldest one. He's now he's pretty old now.
He's above 80.
He's retired, yes, but he's very well known in Ukraine as a translator of Indian
Hindi literature.
Hindi literature, especially Hindi children's books.
Yes.
And we also had two teachers, Katerina Dobnya.
Okay.
And Vlada. I don't remember her last name, sorry, but I remember. So there were three teachers of Hindi at that time. And so basically, but it was 1995, just 4 years after independence. So the Oriental Studies department just started. We had no books from, student books from India, nothing at all. At the very beginning, we were visited by a delegation, a small one from the Indian embassy in Ukraine, and there was the third secretary,
Mr.
in charge
Bagle.
of, in charge of Kal. I think so. I don't remember his name, but what struck me most at that time that he spoke perfect Ukrainian, and for me,
he's the only Indian diplomat who learned Ukrainian, who started
yes, and he was fluent.
Yes.
He was fluent. So for us, like 17, 18-year-old students, to see an Indian speaking perfect Ukrainian in Kiev, it was like a miracle. So it was for us. It was a very inspiring moment to start learning Hindi. But as I said, we didn't have any proper student books from or teachers' books from India. So we started from what was inherited from the Soviet Union, and we started learning Hindi with a book, a very thick one. Dimshits, yes.
Yes, I know.
It's a scary word. It is the last name of its author. But the problem was that the book was developed in the Soviet Union in the very high era of communism, and that's why the Hindi language in the book was very Shuddh Hindi and very, pure Hindi and very Sanskritized. So when we started speaking to, again, Indian diplomats in Kiev, they always mentioned that you speak such pure language. We don't speak Hindi in that way.
Oh, it was not conversational Hindi. It is the Hindi, that is the high Hindi, the Shuddha Hindi.
Shuddh Hindi, yes. But then, so I solved the problem. At the end of the second semester of my first year as a freshman at the university, I remember it was the April of 26th of April 1996. I met a group of Indian students on Maidan Nezalezhnosti in the very center of Kiev, and they happened to be from Punjab, wearing all this paraphernalia from Sikhs and so on. So we started communicating.
They were wearing turbans, yes.
Yes, and turbans, yes, and with kara on the hand and so on. So we made friends, and I started visiting them for, like, let's say maybe 2 or 3 years, something like that. So when I
did you visit India? If you visited, when was it first time you visited India?
No, I never been to India. So
you have never been to India?
It's a sad story. It's a sad story. I studied it. When I was in my third year at the university, our how it's called, the head of the Oriental Studies department, Mr. Halimonenko.
Yes.
He said there was an invitation from Indian government to send students to study to India, and I was one of the brightest. And he said, "You don't go. You will go to Pakistan because you also study Urdu." I said, "Okay, we'll go to Pakistan to study Urdu," but that never happened. I never went to Pakistan, so I was stopped from going to India, and I never went to Pakistan, so I remained in Kiev. So basically, I continued studying Hindi, Urdu, English, and also Italian.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, and we talking about teachers. So I already mentioned Katerina Dobnya, Stepan Nalivaiko as Hindi lecturers at the university. But I must also mention Professor Konstantin Tyshenko.
Yes, he's a
linguistics professor. Yes, actually, he was the one who suggested that I go to the International Relations Institute in Kiev to meet you.
Oh, really?
Actually, in 1995, I went there, but your lecture was cancelled for some reason, and I never made it the second time.
Oh,
so we missed.
Sad.
We could have met. We could have met in 1996.
Long time back. I was not teaching in the international relations, but the building was the same. I was in the journalism department, and you know, Professor Tishenko was my inspiration to be with students and to teach them, and he did a lot to introduce the and to develop the linguistic, you know, the platform for Ukrainians to learn more languages. And I
yes.
I still keep connections with him. If you remember his museum upstairs on the red
building, yes,
the main building of the university. So, you know, if you go there, you will see I presented him with textbooks of Hindi and Bengali so that he has examples of those books. And partly I had many copies which I asked my family to send, because at that point, you know, in 94, even the embassy was in the hotel operating. They had no office proper. And so, you know, it was difficult. So I asked somebody to carry those books, the children's books. And because the dim sheets was very, very dry, no pictures, nothing. And I thought the students should be feeling better to learn as children learn. So, and honestly speaking, I was very scared because I'm not a trained philologist to teach languages, you know. So I was always telling Tishenko, don't put me into this trouble because, you know, I'm not a philologist. I will not do it. And he said, you will be able to do it. Don't worry. And so he was inspiring me a lot, you know. And he was contacted by Umilian Pritsak because I really wanted to work with Pritsak in the Academy of Sciences when he was the director of the Oriental Studies Institute. And Pritsak told me, you don't go away from Ukraine. So I have Professor Tishenko, you must call him because you please work on the students a little bit, you know. So then it was Umilian Pritsak sending me to Professor Tishenko and Professor Tishenko sending me to the journalism faculty. So that was my history. Interesting. So I'm very, very enthusiastic about knowing what are you now doing and how do you see yourself being very active in promoting our relationship between our countries?
I run a web development agency for since 2006, I think. Yes, but it has nothing to do with Hindi or Sanskrit or any of Indian languages. But the problem in Ukraine with studying Indian languages is that there is no formal place except for Hindi to study any Indian language. So, as I mentioned earlier, we also studied Urdu at the university. It was actually my desire after the second year at the university that we start studying Urdu and its script and its vocabulary and so on. And we had a teacher from Pakistan, and he was a student in Kiev, and he taught us Urdu for 3 years, but then he quit the job. So no other Indian language was continued after that. We only have Hindi now. So Bengali is not taught in Ukraine. Sanskrit is not officially taught in Ukraine, and there is only Hindi.
Well,
and
you know,
I wanted
other Indian languages is that, you know, during the Soviet times, yes, there was a great interest in, they call it the Oriental studies, which, you know, I would say Indology, I would rather say it should be the South Asian studies, you know, instead of calling it Oriental studies or Indology, it should be South Asian studies. And then you have a big spectrum of disciplines, big spectrum of expertise and knowledge, and you could work on it. I believe that with time, maybe people will understand, but unfortunately, there is no understanding of this issue of South Asia as a big area which needs to be studied very well.
Exactly.
I will tell you that in our Tagore Center, we started Bengali and we continued for 3 years. And I have 4 people who who can read and write and little bit speak, but they are all adults. It was a center for adult education, like it's for people who just wanted to learn, because we sing Rabindranath Tagore songs and they wanted to learn Bengali, and they also sing.
Wow.
Some of them belong to the group of Sri Chinmoy, so they sing the songs. Those are also in Bengali. So we had this, and after that it was difficult to continue because it's a small organization and I need some kind of support, which we never received from anyone. We did all things ourselves. As you know, the problems, these small organizations encounter. So I believe with time, there will be people who will realize the importance and, look up. Otherwise, we will have to do it ourselves.
Hope so.
Tell me your projects, any project that you have done, which can. I know something about Mahabharata, but I want you to tell it.
As I said, I swam away from Hindi after I graduated from university. Actually, after my master's, I did a postgraduate study, and it was a dissertation to compare the vocabularies of Hindi and Urdu languages. And so I developed a frequency list for both languages based on the speech used by the media, electronic media in India and in Pakistan. And so the study was suggested again by Konstantin Tishenko, Professor Tishenko. And the results were that Hindi and Urdu differ by 30% in their vocabulary, which is a lot, considering the similar studies for European languages. Let's say when people from any country come to Ukraine, they can hear both Russian and Ukrainian being spoken, and they wonder which language to learn. And the thing is that all Ukrainians, they can understand both Russian and Ukrainian. Some of them only speak Russian, they don't speak Ukrainian, but they do understand. But the difference between the Russian and Ukrainian is 38%. So Hindi and Urdu is 30% difference, yes? Between, let's say, Italian and Spanish, I think it's about 30%. Italian and French, it's 31%. So you can imagine how different they are. But I never submitted my dissertation, so I never received the degree. But still, I did the study, and it was nice.
I think you can still do it. You can still pull yourself together.
Maybe the problem. You asked me about my projects, and I wanted to tell you about some problems in this area. You already mentioned.
Please.
You already mentioned. So, as I said, that Oriental Studies Department, it is the exact translation of the institution as it was founded in 1995. It only lasted for 5 years until 2000. In 2000, there was a reform at the university. It was, I believe, it was politically motivated to control students to vote correctly for the then president Kuchma or something like that. So they did a very great reform at the Philology Institute. It is part of the Shevchenko University. It is just across the road from the red building, the yellow building.
I know, because our faculty was there when I studied.
Yes, and the problem was that the Oriental Studies Department, which for 5 years, it operated for 5 years, and students studied Hindi, Urdu, Chinese, Farsi, Persian, Turkish, Korean, Japanese, Arabic, and so on. So many languages. All of a sudden, it ended. I mean, the department, and this was replaced by chairs of Turkic languages, chairs of Chinese language, chair of Japanese language, and of course, chair of Hindi. in 2000, I think 3 or 4, I saw that the things were not developing correctly. So I had nothing to do with the university at that time already, but I wanted to change something. So I went to the embassy, to the Indian embassy in Kiev, and suggested that they support the opening of South Asian Studies Center at the university. So the ambassador, I think it was the Mahabharata Saga at that time, and Mrs. I think Subhashini. So they supported the project. They went to the rector, Skupenko. He was at that time the rector of the university. He said, okay, we'll open the center at our university, but it will be called not the South Asian Studies Center. It will be called the Center for the Hindi language. So the whole idea narrowed from the studying the region as a whole to studying only one of thousands of languages spoken in that region.
Yeah, it's a pity because, I'm not against Hindi because, I'm very much in favor. But at the same time, I think, like languages like Tamil, languages like Marathi, Gujarati, Punjabi, and
Telugu.
of course, Bengali, because you have it's the seventh most populous, seventh language or the sixth language being spoken widely by people, 230 million people. Well, and yeah, I speak of Bengali because I'm a native speaker of Bengali. I feel for it. And, this is a pity that the amount of languages that South Asia has and the diversity, no other region in the world can have that, So I'm very, very sad that this thing is not happening. And I really hope that, some university will take it up in the future. We should keep on insisting that this is important. Well, tell me about your projects. You still talk about problems, but your achievements, and then we will talk about problems again.
Achievements, yes. I met my future wife in 2012, and 1 year after, I heard her watching a TV, something on her computer, and I immediately noticed it was something in Hindi. And she is a psychologist by profession. She only speaks English. She never studied Hindi. But she was watching a TV serial in Hindi. For me, it was like a miracle, So I immediately got interested in what was happening. And as it happened, she was watching 2 TV serials recently developed in India. It was the Mahabharata, 2013, not the old one, which is very famous in India, but the new one in 2013. It was shot. It was at that time it was I think the most expensive TV serial to be shot in India. Very popular with an amazing cast, and so my interest in Hindi grew again. It was 2013. So I had a pause, like say from 2003 for 10 years. I didn't study much Hindi and didn't even look in that direction. But from 2013, I got interested in the language again. I started watching the TV serial with my wife, and it was actually a serial translated by amateurs in Russia into the Russian language. But the problem was that they were translating from subtitles in English. So it was a translation from translation. And since the job was done by amateurs, the translation was not accurate at all. Sometimes it was like, nothing to do with what was spoken on the screen. So I saw the problem and I decided to. Actually, there were 3 TV serials that we saw. It was the Mahabharata, then there was Devankadev Mahadev, a very long one, 800 something episodes. Mahabharata is 270 something, and that was 800 episodes. We watched all of them. And I decided to translate the Mahabharata because to the Ukrainian audience, I think it will be easier to accept it, to watch it, because Devon Kedev Mahadev is too really religious for our Orthodox, Christian Orthodox population. So
Mahabharata is the epic, you know, it is the epic and it is the longest poem on earth.
Yes. Yeah, I know. But the producers, they managed to squeeze the epic into 263 or 67 episodes. So I sat down at my computer. At that time, I had a lot of free time. I lost my job. And I started translating, and I guess I translated some 11 or 12 episodes, put them online for people to watch. And I translated them from Hindi, from the original Hindi, into Ukrainian. I did the translation and subtitles myself, and people liked it. And because it was translation from the original Hindi, it was, you know, up to what was going on the screen, with all the subtle differences in meanings and so on and so forth. And so I didn't want to stop. I knew that I was doing some piracy job. You know, you cannot release a TV serial without the rights to do so. So you have to ask for the rights. But I didn't do it, you know, openly, only through my friends and so on. So I wanted this TV serial to be shown in Ukraine. As you know Ukraine very well, right?
Well, hope so.
You know that Ukrainian, during the Soviet Union, Indian films were very popular in Ukraine.
Yes.
I mean, every Ukrainian cinema hall was running Indian films in the 80s, in my childhood. Every cinema hall was running Indian films. Everyone, and everybody went to see them, those films. It was the time, these 2 or 3 hours long movies were watched by all the population in the Soviet Union. So my parents knew a lot about Indian cinema, but with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the situation changed. The new contracts were not signed, and new films were not released in Ukraine, and this thing continues even now. You can only watch Indian films in Ukraine on television on some channels. Actually, most of them run some old films translated in the during the Soviet Union time. So I would say very few new translations are done, and it's a very sad thing. So basically, I would say at the very beginning, you asked what I think about how to promote the understanding between the people. Well, Ukrainians, as general, they now know very little about India if they don't go to India. So most of the people never think about India as a country for tourism. They only think about Turkey or Egypt or maybe some neighboring countries in the European Union. And only a few of them, I would say, go to India to study, to travel, and so to work. But to show the country as it develops, I mean, India has done a great job in the past, let's say, 20 years in its development from a rural how to say it, from the country with doing agricultural produce to the country with very developed pharmaceuticals industry. Now they do the space projects and so on and so forth. And only in 20 years, it's a great development. And Ukrainians as a nation know very little about it. So basically, the easiest thing to introduce the country, introduce the changes to the Ukrainian population is through television and through films. And this is a good opportunity for Indian producers to work in. I would gladly support such initiatives with the management issues of the translation. And going back to this Mahabharata project, I actually visited the Indian embassy at that time in 2015, I think. And I suggested that we go further and try to show this TV serial on the Ukrainian television. Then I paid several visits to the former UT1 channel, the state-run channel, which is now Hromadske, I think, television.
Pershi, you were Pershi.
Yes. It is a national channel in Ukraine, very popular, very developing with young stuff, so on. But they still have some old traditions. So first they supported the idea of showing this TV serial, but then they dropped it without explaining. The project director said that we are not interested in showing any Indian films in Ukraine. Sorry. So.
But do you think that there is a problem of stereotyping Indian films? The type
I think so.
Bollywood films that had a very stereotyped notion of being a bit melodramatic, a bit too not realistic. Might be that is the impediment, and also that, it was popular during the Soviet time, so we should not touch it now. Is it that stereotype that is still hankering, and the new films, the good ones, are not being shown as a result?
That the stereotypes again come from the Soviet Union. We had a gap of no films from India since 1995. It's been 25 years. Ukrainians don't see new Indian films. In 25 years, Indian cinema changed a lot.
Well, Indian cinema has an alternative cinema all the time, and some films were shown, and there is a brilliant tradition of intellectual films, the art house films, those were also there, not only entertainment films. So it's a very big, well, we say it's an industry, film industry. It's not an art anymore. I mean, it's so huge, it's big, and it has big budget also now. It's very rich area. So, well, that is one way. And what about scholarly traditions? What do you think that you can really do many things in Indology, because you have an expertise, I think, and that could be used, don't you think so? Even if you are busy in other things, but I think part of your time you can still devote to, let's say, researching, finishing your dissertation, or teaching Hindi. I don't know, maybe there are things you could develop and you could do. What do you think?
As to my current interests, so you rightly mentioned that I have an interest in Sanskrit. It's a great ocean to learn, but I have good foundation for studying it because I studied Hindi, I studied the Devanagari, so it's no problem.
Yeah, if you know Devanagari, it is easy, but you have
actually my interest in Sanskrit started from the Mahabharata.
Exactly.
Part of the scenes were shot in Sanskrit, and I didn't understand a thing. So there was Krishna speaking, and he was reciting verses from Bhagavad Gita.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, if I'm translating this TV serial and to do the job properly, I need to study Sanskrit first to translate the scenes which are in Sanskrit. And then I started learning about Sanskrit more and more. I personally established connections with the Sanskrit Center in Auroville in India. And there is about Auroville. For those who don't know, Auroville is a man-made, let's say, man-made center, a town for people from all over the world to study everything our civilization has developed so far.
Yes, it's a wonderful place.
Yes, they have a center for Sanskrit studies there, and very responsive and very, research oriented. They develop computer-based dictionaries. They do some studies. They also develop frequency lists for different works of literature in Sanskrit and so on. Then I was in contact with the university in Australia. They have a good foundation there for studying Sanskrit. And then, of course, in England. So I ended up contacting also all the Introduction to Sanskrit, which was the book Introduction to Sanskrit, which was published by the Cambridge University Press. Mm-hmm. So my idea was to translate this book into Ukrainian and to help people in Ukrainian learn Sanskrit as well. Because, you know, in Ukraine, we have no centers for Sanskrit, and there are no Sanskrit students' books at all in Ukrainian. The only one which I saw, it was a book written by a Belarusian writer, originally in Russian. It was translated into Ukrainian, and it is a book of Vedic Sanskrit, not the classical Sanskrit. Mm-hmm. So this is it. So, but looking at that book, you cannot start the language only with that book only. You need somebody to guide you through, you know.
Exactly, it's a teacher's resource. Maybe it's not a book.
Yes. So I again was in contact with the university about maybe the university, if it gets interested in the project, maybe they will be able to offer a course in Sanskrit and invite maybe 2 lecturers from India for 5 years to work here in Ukraine, maybe with rotation or something, and introduce Sanskrit.
This can be done, but tell me then, can it be an exchange program so that 2 professors from Ukraine can go to teach Ukrainian in India? What does Ukraine need to do to make itself known to Indians also? Can you tell a few words on that?
As we mentioned, there is no Oriental studies in Ukraine anymore. We only study languages.
No, but there is no Ukrainian studies in India.
That's also the problem, but I know nothing about that. I've never been to India, so.
Okay.
Yes, there are problems in India with the Ukrainian language also, I think. But there is a little Ukrainian diaspora in India, and I think they can raise those issues to the proper level and work on it. Introduce the Ukrainian language at some universities, maybe in Delhi, Calcutta, or
sure.
Or somewhere.
Well, we are in Ukraine. We should work here. And tell me what do you think in the coming 5 years? What would you advise the students to do to know India more?
Currently students have more opportunities.
Yes.
More opportunities to learn, more opportunities to get information, and so on. When I studied from 1995 to 2000, there was no internet at that time. I got my first email account in 1999 when I was visiting the United States. So no internet, no literature, just very, very few opportunities. But now with the introduction, with the advance of technologies, there is a massive amount of information on the web about Hindi, about Bengali, Sanskrit, Telugu, any language you wish, and you can see a lot of videos on YouTube.
Yes.
And learn from there. But you already said that I'm talking too much about problems in Ukraine. There is one small problem with the students in Ukraine. I didn't realize it until Professor Tishchenko told me. I visited him at the university some 2 years ago, and he said the problem is that each year the university accepts student applications for different languages, Oriental languages. And usually there are like 3, 5, 6 languages offered. And of course, those languages, they rank differently in the heads of the prospective students. And students often, the brightest ones, they choose languages like Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Turkish, Arabic. And those who remain, they go for Hindi. They go for Hindi because there is less competition. And it happens that this happens every 2 or 3 years. There is an old batch of Hindi students at the university, but the problem is that they are not, I don't say they not that all of them, but I would say most of them are not the brightest ones. And that's why I graduated in 2000. I went for postgraduate. I never submitted my dissertation, but I did the study. I mean, at least I received some result. But in the past 20 years, there was no dissertation defended in the Hindi language in Ukraine at all. There are 2 lecturers, no, 3 lecturers, as I know, who teach Hindi at the university. All of them have PhDs, but not in the Hindi language. One of them has in history, another one in some teaching science, and another one is also in some cultural issues or something. But those dissertations are not in Hindi language.
You mean in philology, in the area of linguistics?
In philology, yes, exactly. And we have like 20 years of teaching, no, 25 already, yeah, of teaching Hindi in Ukraine, and we have no professor of Hindi language, Ukrainian born, who is has a degree in Hindi language as a linguistics subject.
You mean PhD? No,
yes, PhD in linguistics, Hindi linguistics.
Well, this is something that, yes, needs to be raised. Of course, we are talking a lot about problems, and we must, summarize our discussion today so we can continue it maybe after some time later. So, again, I will request you to speak about what advice would you give to your children, for example, who will be growing up, or to policymakers, politicians, or to people who have something to do with, something they can do to help us, to help us develop the intercultural ties.
That's a broad question.
Finally, you can make a final remark, and we will just finish after that. Yeah.
I would say that Ukraine as a nation, government must not only look at the West, but also to the East. And let's say Ukraine looks at China, at Japan, but it overlooks South Asia. And as a result, there is almost no funding for studying that area. And until this is the case, no miracles will happen in Ukraine in this area. Such enthusiasts as myself, they are rare in Ukraine. There are, but they are like thousands of them, something like that. And they are all underfunded. And it's only, some people's interest. It's like a hobby or something. No great changes will be seen until some real funding comes, with real projects being funded. So by real projects, I mean starting a course, a continuous course in Sanskrit, in Bengali, at the university level, inviting teachers from India to study, sending teachers from Ukraine to study and teach. I mean, it should be a reciprocal process, And what Ukraine needs to do is Ukrainian cinema is also developing, and we have great cinemas which can be
serious, very good area.
Yes, we have Ukrainian cinemas, films recently produced, which stand very good chances to be hits in Indian cinema halls. Also, as we mentioned, Indian cinema. So we have alternative cinema. We have Bollywood, and we have TV serials. Ukrainians know nothing about them. So I would say, if I happen to meet some producers from India, I will be gladly helpful to start doing business in Ukraine, showing such films, because through films and TV serials, India can, within a short span of time, tell Ukrainians about what India is now, how people live, what problems they face, what their interests are, and so on. Because currently, if you ask an ordinary Ukrainian on the street, they will never mention you Indian actors. So Shah Rukh Khan, who knows Shah Rukh Khan in Ukraine? Only like a few hundred people know who Shah Rukh Khan is. It is the king of Bollywood, but Ukrainians don't know him, or Salman Khan, or Amir Khan, whatever.
Recently, there is a book written by a lady. She wrote about Amitabh Bachchan, Shah Rukh Khan, and some other heroes. I was asking myself that, why only heroes? We have very good heroines.
Yes, exactly.
It's a very biased, very sexist approach. I mean, from a woman, I didn't expect that that there is a book and only male actors were promoted. So I was very sad that India has perhaps the very big galaxy of very good women actresses, and
Exactly.
nobody was there. So, well, there's a lot of work to do.
Yes.
I thank you a lot for being with us today, and I think we will again have you on a specific theme to talk about. And I wish you a very nice time. If you would like to say anything else, please, in a couple of sentences, and then we will end here.
Thank you again very much for inviting me to this project. It was a pleasure to talk today, and I would be very glad to talk to you again. Maybe we should talk about Indian cinema. If we mentioned it a lot.
We can have even a discussion. Yes.
Yes, because I would say Indian cinema has a good business chance in Ukraine. There are opportunities to develop, and we can talk about it.
Okay.
And for those interested in India and Indian cinema, Indian films, I would suggest to go online, study the language with the resources available, and if you have some specific questions, you can always find me on the internet, on Facebook, and we can talk about your inquiries and discuss it later.
Sure. Thank you so much, and till we see each other again and we continue this series. Thank you very much, Stanislav. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dhanyavad.